You're listening to Myers-Briggs Question Corner with Edith Richards.
Hi folks, I'm recording this week's episode in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and like many of you, I'm distancing myself and working from home. Now, for those of you tuning in who identify as introverted types, this time of social distancing may be a dream come true. You can finally get away from the world in your own safe space. You don't have to worry about what to do or say to your coworkers or how to say it, or have to explain yourself when you just need a break from all the chatty Cathys. The stimuli from the external world is gone, and now you can both focus and relax. Now, if you describe yourself as more of an extrovert like I do, rather than this time being a dream come true, it may turn into more of a nightmare if you don't prepare yourself to be away from the world for long periods of time or take the necessary steps to energize yourself so that you don't become disengaged or even depressed. So what I want to focus on today is what happens to Myers-Briggs extroverted types when they are forced to stay away from the world, not physically interacting with other people, and what they can do to cope. And folks, I've been very upfront about my own Myers-Briggs type preferences in previous podcasts. I'm an extroverted type, and this issue is very real to me. And for those of you who are tuning in who can relate, I feel your pain. We're going to get through this together. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to clarify what introversion and extroversion are according to the Myers-Briggs type indicator. There are two ways of getting and using energy: extroversion, or E, and introversion, or I. People who prefer extroversion focus on the outside world to get energy through interacting with people and or doing things. People who prefer introversion focus on the inner world and get energy through reflecting on information, on ideas, experiences, or concepts. Now, we all use both introversion and extroversion in our daily lives, but there's one that comes more easily and naturally for us. It's easy to think that we can train ourselves to be one way or the other, and to a certain extent we can. If we're forced, for whatever reason, to use our non-preferences repeatedly in our daily lives, it'll eventually become like a new normal for us, so to speak. Using myself as an example here, my mom was my primary caregiver, and she is a very clear introvert. And as a child, my behaviors and activities that were rewarded were introverted ones. For example, solitary activities like reading or piano, playing the piano by myself, not with groups, and individual sports like horseback riding. And I was taught to think before I speak, to be mindful of other people, don't interrupt, etc. We also lived on a farm that was very isolated from other people, and I used to beg my mom to let us move to a neighborhood so I could play with the other kids. As a teenager, I craved group activities, and in college, I actively sought out other groups. And as I became more aware of type theory, it was like a light bulb clicked. I'm naturally an extrovert, but due to my upbringing, I became very comfortable in a world of introverts. So much so that even today, I'm often mistaken for an introvert. But I want to be clear here. There's no right or wrong. There's no better or worse. In fact, the brains of introverts and extroverts are actually wired differently. One major difference is the way they each respond to the neurotransmitters dopamine and acetylcholine. Dopamine is more active in the brains of extroverts, which means that extroverts are triggered by external rewards like getting out and exploring the environment and interacting with different people, affiliation in different groups, and things like that. But extroverts also have a lower sensitivity to dopamine, and they need adrenaline to increase it, which is why they need external activity. The more outwardly focused they are, the more the dopamine is activated, and essentially the happier they feel. But it's a different story for introverts. Dopamine doesn't work in the same way in their brains. It overloads their brains so they become overstimulated, and they're not as triggered by these external rewards, and as such, they may appear outwardly to be less enthusiastic. The fact is, they're just less energized by external stimulation. Now, the other neurotransmitter that I mentioned, acetylcholine, is also one that rewards us, but on a different and more subtle level. The simplest way to put it is that it gets the body ready for relaxation and hibernation. Now, doesn't that sound like two of the things that introverts like the best? Acetylcholine is more active in the brains of introverts, and it helps the body to conserve energy, to relax muscles and lower blood pressure, essentially disengage from the external world. So in short, extroverts prefer the effects of dopamine, while introverts prefer the effects of acetylcholine. The pathways of these neurotransmitters are different too. Dopamine pathways are much shorter, which could also explain why extroverts respond more quickly to a lot of stimuli at once. All of this is to say that science indicates we're predisposed to one or the other from birth. Social distancing might therefore be easier for introverts, but harder for we extroverts. So what are we going to do during these troubling times? First, know that exercising and eating right and getting the proper amount of sleep is important for both our physical health and our mental well-being. Knowing what your triggers are and putting a plan in place for dealing with them is going to be tremendously helpful. For example, I've got to admit that I hate mornings, and if I'm left to my own devices, I will oversleep. Then I'm going to feel guilty and unproductive, and that will just lead me to feeling bad about myself. I've realized over the years that it's really important for me to get as much sunlight as possible. So knowing this, I've made a plan to keep to a regular 8 to 5 schedule during the day. So whatever your trigger is, whether it's eating sweets late at night or watching too much TV or getting lost in the world of social media at the expense of things you need to do, make a plan to address these issues as soon as possible. The more you're aware of your tendencies, the better you'll be able to overcome them. Let's talk briefly about exercising. I can't stress how important this is for everyone. Now, your gym may be closed or your yoga classes might be canceled, but that doesn't mean that it's time for you to give up these activities. In fact, I'll say they're more important than ever. Exercising will give your brain a boost too, and endorphins that can help you combat the depression that we extroverts might feel by being socially isolated. So, my extroverted friends tuning in, I'd like to encourage you to get out and walk and run or hike or bike, exercise outdoors. This will also provide you with some of that external stimulation that your brain is craving. One other thing I can think of that will help you during these trying times, my extroverted friends. First, know what type of stimulation you need. We extroverts don't just need to be around people. We need external stimulation, and the type that will benefit us will vary from person to person. So think about the types of activities you typically enjoy, and as much as possible, keep doing them. An extroverted girlfriend of mine participates in a weekly book club where several ladies meet together to drink wine and eat snacks and talk about what they're reading. Well, obviously they can't do that now, so they've moved their discussion to one that's virtual on Skype. No, it's not quite the same, but it does give my friends something to look forward to, and as much as is possible this moment, it fulfills some of those extroverted needs. So think about things that can give you a lot of fulfillment and keep doing them virtually as much as you can. One last thought for you, my extroverted friends. If all else fails, reach out, virtually of course, to an introverted friend and ask them how they are surviving social distancing. They've probably been doing it for years and are well prepared. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to submit a question yourself, then you can find us at www.atopcareer.com. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.